Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are done with Thanksgiving week and we are back to our regularly scheduled programming. And as promised, we return with the boys. And in this one, we're doing the origin of Frenchie. Now, here's a cool thing. Frenchie's origin story is actually really cool. Like, it's a really cool and enjoyable origin, if not probably one of the funniest. Because with everything that goes down, you're just kind of like, but really though? Like, it's it's pretty cool, right? So Frenchie ends up coming back from the war, right? The big war. And it's kind of a funny thing because he comes from a small town, right? He doesn't come from like this great big huge place, right? I mean, honestly, I'm not very knowledgeable about France geography. I took French in college and bombed it entirely. You know what really threw me off with French were the gender pronunciations, right? Like a coat in English is a coat. In French, it's like a coat is one word for a guy's coat and it's another word for a woman's coat. And it's just kind of like, all right, that sort of throws me off. But nonetheless, it's one of these things where it looks like he's from an exceedingly small town, a town where like everybody knows everybody else. And there's something kind of homey about that, right? There's something kind of homey about coming from a place where everybody knows your name, where basically everybody knows who you are. I don't mean to invoke Cheers, but like where everybody knows who you are, right? There's something kind of comforting about that. Now, the funny thing is, of course, with Frenchie having left, being greeted by his mom and his dad, the first question he asks here is really, whatever happened to Marie? And the cool thing is that we end up learning that in his younger days, Frenchie was in love with a young girl named Marie. And for the most part, it was like a summer of passion, right? Now, the nature of being like young and in love is that it really is usually just a passion-fueled thing, right? I mean, I can't really think of very many 17-year-old people that I know that I grew up with who stayed with the first woman that they were with, right? I mean, it doesn't really happen too much. It's just kind of really, it shows like a summer fling is really what it was. Now, and ultimately he ends up finding out that what had happened is that when he'd left, basically he came face to face with Mr. Steal Your Girl. What he had in his younger days is he had a schoolmate, a kind of a rival schoolmate, basically a guy that he used to get into arguments with or fights with all the time, that was named Black Pierre. Or really, it's really just Pierre, but he called him Black Pierre. Now, here's the funny thing about this, is we're not really given like the full totality of the experience between these two guys when they were younger. We're only given it from the perspective of Frenchie. Really, it just kind of looks like Frenchie was a dick and just like bullying this kid all the time. So in reality, if that was the case, I don't really feel bad for Frenchie, right? Like the guy who was being bullied came out on top. He was like, yeah, man, you bullied me all the time. You gave me a hard time all the time. So you went to the war, you gave me grief, I took your girl. Like, what do you want me to tell you, man? That's just the way the game gets played. And it's kind of messed up too, because he's just like, hey man, like I jacked your girl. Like, she's mine now. So that's basically it, and just rides off laughing at him. Now, here's the worst thing about it all, is that basically she hitched her horse to a guy who's riding around on a bike. Let's just kind of take note of this for a second, right? Frenchie is being talked trash to by a guy who stole his girl, and this guy's riding off with his girl on a bicycle, right? So let's just kind of take that in. Let's take that in for a second. It's kind of pitiful, but ultimately Frenchie drops into a really bad place. Now, here's the thing about this. This is one of the reasons why I think this is so cool. Here's the thing about this. This is probably the most relatable thing ever. Every single person, for those of you guys who have never really been in like a committed relationship or never really, devoted your heart to somebody before, whether it's a kind of a passionate short-term fling or whether it is something serious, that when the time comes when it ends, everybody goes to this point, right? Everybody goes to this moment where it's just like, you feel like the world is ending, right? Like everything you know and love has come crashing down around you. And everybody needs that, right? Everybody needs that kind of release, where you just sort of just kind of spill your heart out there. Now, maybe spilling your heart out comes in the form of the drink, which is dangerous because it can lead you down a really dark path. Other times just going and working out, but you got to find a way to release that, to kind of cope with your frustration, your anger, and your sadness of the situation. And it's interesting to see how Frenchie does this insofar as he just kind of wallows in his sorrow. Now, of course, everybody does this, but you can't do it forever, right? Otherwise, you just end up being the guy who just feels bad for himself all the time, and that's basically it. But his father ends up coming to him and basically saying, you've got to get revenge on Black Pierre. You've got to fight back, and you got to get your girl back. Now, in my personal philosophy, I don't really do that, right? I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, if she really cared about him that much, she would go back to him. She would just leave the guy she's with and go back to him. But Frenchie doesn't really matter that much to her because she didn't make that choice, right? She stayed with the guy she was with. And so it's kind of a smart move by Frenchie to kind of say, no, that's not really the game that I play. Now, it's not Frenchie being a sourpuss here, right? It's not him being a wimp. His argument is, I don't like violence. And having been in the war and having seen the full brunt and the full totality of just how terrible human violence can be, it's a rightful stance to take. It's a rightful situation to be like, I've seen the worst of humanity, and I do not want to go back to that place again. And so what this basically does is lead to the festival of the Saints of Haha, I guess is really what this is. My French is terrible. This is probably the coolest festival ever, because what these guys do is they basically do jousts, right? But they do jousts where they're riding their bicycles and they have like these gigantic baguettes and then basically just like charge at each other with these things. That would be amazing to see. The real question is, how stale are these baguettes, right? Because there comes a point where things get so stale they just kind of crumble. So I guess it's got to be just before that point where it really is like getting hit with a stick, because stale bread can hurt, man. Like it really, really can. But in the middle of all this, Black Pierre is really kind of like the champ, kind of like well, not really the champ, but he's kind of one of the top guys here. And the issue is that the father of Frenchie really kind of views him as a coward because he won't fight for what's his, right? He won't stand up and say like, that's mine and I'm gonna go fight for it, right? And again, this is when things get kind of crazy when it comes to the notion of love, and it comes to the notion of romance, when it comes to the notion of, hey, like, but like she's a grown adult though, so like she can kind of make her own choices and that kind of thing. The issue here is that it's not really just about Marie anymore. It's really more of the family honor, insofar that what you had is you had Black Pierre who essentially took something from Frenchie, left him in a vulnerable state, made him look weak, and then Frenchie is doing nothing to correct that. And so what it does is it makes Frenchie's family look weak. And so as a result of that, his father shows up and basically challenges Black Pierre to a baguette joust, which is kind of hard to take serious, but at the same time, it's amazing. And ultimately, in the middle of all this, what ends up happening is, of course, Frenchie tries to stop him and says, hey, look, man, you're old, your heart can't handle this. And ultimately, you end up having Black Pierre, who more or less cheats, ends up like ruining the bicycle and really kind of tripping up Frenchie's father, which sends him flipping over and basically kills him. And so in response to that, Frenchie loses his mind, because in his mind, he's basically lost it all now, right? Because he's like, his mom died shortly after from despair. So he essentially, like, this guy stole his girl and then killed his dad, and then his mom died because of his dad's death, right? Black Pierre cost him everything. And so it's kind of crazy, because at that point it's like, all right, well, now it just comes down to general principle, right? Like now it comes down to, okay, this guy stole my girl, that sucks, like I can find a new one, whatever, but like he killed my dad now, and like that's a problem. So like that's one of those things where you're kind of like, okay, so Black Pierre needs to come to an understanding about his place in the bigger picture. Black Pierre needs to be reminded where he resides in the great sphere of things, and I am going to do that. That's basically what Frenchie says, that at that point, having lost everything that was valuable to him, he ultimately ends up just kind of walking away from his village, right? Like just sort of going out and roaming the world, but not before taking his revenge on Black Pierre by basically stringing him up and running what looks like basically a rope through his mouth and out of his backside, and then in turn giving the finger to Marie, leaving her hanging and saying like when she came back and said, please take me back, he was like, not a chance. Peace. And ultimately ended up bailing. And then from there, just started roaming from place to place. Now, this is when Billy Butcher comes into play. And this is kind of a funny thing that really kind of has to be asked here, is how is it that Billy Butcher really seems to keep running into these circumstances where he keeps finding these various guys, where he's always kind of like in the right place at the right time? Because what ends up going on here is that Frenchie's in this bar, and basically like while he's hanging out in this location, some American guy runs up on him and is like where he basically knocks over the drink of Frenchie looking for a fight. The response of Frenchie is, buy me a new one. And of course this American guy is like, nah, man, consider it payback for us saving your backside during World War II. And it's kind of crazy because this guy basically champions the actions of America during World War II and is like, look how great we are, but was never actually there, right? Like it's basically taking credit for an event that he was never really part of. And so as a response to that, Frenchie's like, okay, well then fine. Then, much like Black Pierre, I'll help you understand your place in the bigger picture, and basically instigates an entire bar fight. And takes on all these guys by himself. And that's what Billy Butcher was looking for. Billy Butcher was looking for a guy who wasn't necessarily broken, but a guy who had basically been pushed to his limits, a man with nothing to lose. And that's one of the things that really makes a guy the most dangerous. When a man has nothing to lose, he's not afraid of anything. He has no fear there because there's nothing else for him to lose anymore, right? I mean, he's not afraid of losing his family. He's not afraid of losing his friends because he doesn't really have any or anything like that. It's basically just him and the world by himself. And so ultimately, Frenchie's a guy who can take all comers. And that's really what it is. That's really why Billy Butcher wanted him, is because he's a man at his wit's end and doesn't really, is really kind of like, at his limit. And at that point, that's what he wants. He wants a guy on his side who will do whatever it takes to win, because ultimately he doesn't have to worry about repercussions for anything except for himself. And so it's one of those things where Frenchie's attitude is kind of, so long as they don't catch me, I don't really care what happens, right? They can't do anything to me. They can't take anything from me because I have nothing left to take. It's really one of the reasons why I would argue Frenchie is probably the most dangerous of all the boys. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.